Leave now or I'll call the cops. The voice of the flight attendant cut through the air, freezing the entire cabin. Standing in the aisle, her gaze sharp and judgmental, she pointed at the black mother cradling her baby. "You don't belong here," she added, sneering. The woman, calm and composed, stood her ground, not a flicker of fear in her eyes. Moments earlier, this mother had boarded the flight like any other passenger, expecting a smooth journey. But what she didn't expect was to be humiliated in front of an entire first-class cabin. She had dressed down for this flight, deliberately blending in hopes of simply enjoying a quiet trip. But the moment she stepped into that cabin, she was met with suspicion, hostility, and the harsh glare of a staff who believed she didn't belong. But they didn't know. They didn't know that the woman they'd just insulted wasn't just another passenger. She was the CEO of the very airline they worked for. As the words hung in the air, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The flight attendants, one by one, exchanged looks, none daring to act, but all stunned. And the woman? She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. Instead, she calmly reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and dialed. "Rachel, initiate phase 1. They've made their move." Seconds later, the phone call was over. Her executive assistant was already activating the protocol they had set up for situations like this. "It's done, ma'am. Phase 1 is live," came the voice on the other end. The tension in the cabin thickened. The flight attendant, standing rigidly at the front of the cabin, had no idea who she was up against. "This isn't a scene you want to make," the flight attendant warned, stepping closer. But the woman remained seated, her calm demeanor now turning into a quiet strength that was far more dangerous than any outburst could ever be. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I suggest you learn." The flight attendant sneered, still unimpressed. "Who are you supposed to be?" she challenged. Without a word, the woman lifted her phone and showed the flight attendant the screen. There, in black and white, was her name, the CEO of the very airline that this flight attendant worked for. It was at that exact moment that the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The reality of the situation settled in. The woman wasn't just any passenger, she was the boss. And the rules of this flight were about to change. The flight attendant froze, her smug expression fading into a look of sheer panic. The rest of the cabin passengers watched in stunned silence as the woman stood up. She looked around at the staff, each of them now realizing that their moment of power had just crumbled. But the woman wasn't done. She turned to the flight attendant, her voice steady. "You just made a very costly mistake, and I'm about to fix it." As she walked towards the front of the plane, the flight attendant, now realizing the gravity of the situation, stepped back, her eyes wide with shock. The woman's every step was calculated, a quiet yet fierce confidence emanating from her. The passengers, many of whom had quietly observed the drama unfolding, began to murmur among themselves. What they had just witnessed was not just a confrontation, it was a revelation. This was no longer about a woman being disrespected. This was about power, and how quickly it could shift in a single moment. The flight attendant had no idea what was coming next, but the woman knew exactly how this story would end. And it wasn't going to end well for the staff who thought they could dictate who belonged and who didn't. This wasn't just a lesson in humility. It was a reminder of the power of silence, the power of knowing your worth, and the power of using that knowledge at the right moment. As the woman made her way to the front of the plane, a new reality began to set in. The staff was now facing the consequences of their actions. But what happened next was something they never saw coming. The flight attendant would learn, the hard way, that she had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The tension in the cabin was thick as the flight attendant's eyes darted back and forth, trying to make sense of the situation. She had never expected this. She had never expected to be standing face to face with the woman who had the power to end her career with a single phone call. As the woman stood at the front of the plane, calmly waiting for the flight to take off, the rest of the passengers watched in disbelief. There was no anger in her eyes, no sense of rage. She wasn't shouting or making threats, but the power she held was undeniable. The flight attendant, now sweating, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. The passengers who had been watching the entire exchange were starting to murmur among themselves. Some of them had their phones out, recording, unsure of how this situation would unfold. What they did know was that they were witnessing something that was far beyond just a simple misunderstanding. This was a moment of reckoning. "Ma'am, please," the flight attendant said, her voice faltering slightly. I didn't know who you were. I just followed protocol." The woman didn't flinch. She didn't even look at her. Instead, she stood silently, as if waiting for something to happen, her calmness spreading like a quiet storm. "You followed protocol?" the woman finally said, her voice low but firm. "You followed protocol and decided I didn't belong here? You decided my worth based on how I looked? On my appearance?" The flight attendant's face flushed. She could feel the weight of her mistake. It was one thing to be rude, but it was another to make assumptions based on something as shallow as appearance, and now she was paying the price for it. "You see," the woman continued, her gaze never leaving the flight attendant, "this is the problem. People like you believe you have the right to judge others based on their looks, their clothes, their background. But what you don't realize is that it's not about any of that. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look or where they come from." The flight attendant swallowed hard. She couldn't speak. The weight of her actions was crushing her. She had made an assumption, and it had been so far from the truth. The woman wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just another black woman in the first-class cabin. She was the CEO. She was the person who owned the airline. And here she was, being treated like an outsider in a place she built. The woman's words hung in the air like a challenge, one that the flight attendant wasn't sure how to respond to. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the woman said, her tone softening just slightly. "I'm here to teach a lesson. A lesson about humility, about respect, about the consequences of our actions. And today, you will learn that lesson." The flight attendant opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had no defense. She had no excuse. The woman's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. She pulled it out and checked the screen. It was a message from her assistant, Rachel. "The board is already aware. The emails are sent. The protocol is in motion." The woman didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply placed the phone back in her pocket and turned her attention back to the flight attendant. "You're lucky I don't fire you right here and now," she said, her voice sharp. "But don't think you've gotten off easy. This is only the beginning. You'll be hearing from my legal team very soon. I'm going to make sure that the entire staff knows about this. I'm going to make sure that everyone knows the consequences of treating people this way." The flight attendant's heart raced. She couldn't believe what was happening. She had just insulted the woman who owned the entire airline, and now she was facing the very real consequences of her actions. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, the woman sat back in her seat, her eyes scanning the cabin, now filled with passengers who were no longer just observers. They were witnesses. And as the flight attendant returned to her station, head down, trying to avoid the gaze of the passengers who had witnessed her humiliation, the atmosphere in the cabin had completely shifted. The power dynamic had changed. No longer was she the one in control. The woman, the CEO, had all the power now, and the lesson had only just begun. As the flight soared into the sky, the flight attendant couldn't help but wonder how much her life would change after this. Would she lose her job? Would she be reprimanded? Would the public outcry be enough to ruin her career? She didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. She had just learned the hardest lesson of her life, and it was a lesson she would never forget. The flight continued its journey through the skies, but the atmosphere within the cabin was anything but calm. The passengers who had witnessed the exchange were still processing what had just happened. Whispers spread like wildfire through the aisles, some of them in disbelief, others in admiration. No one could quite believe what they had just seen. A simple misunderstanding? Hardly. This was something far deeper, a stark reminder of the power of prejudice and how quickly it could unravel when the truth was revealed. The flight attendant, now humiliated and retreating to her station, couldn't escape the weight of her mistake. She tried to go through the motions of her duties, but her hands shook and her mind raced. What would happen when they landed? Would the story go viral? Would the board take action? Or would it all be swept under the rug, dismissed as a one-off incident? She didn't know, but she could feel her career teetering on the edge. The woman, the CEO, had already made it clear that there would be consequences. The legal team was involved. The protocol had been activated. There was no going back. The flight attendant glanced at the passengers who had been recording the entire incident. Their phones were still out, the screens glowing, capturing every last bit of the aftermath. Some were already uploading videos to social media, tagging the airline. The hashtag was spreading fast. number CEO on board was starting to trend. It wasn't just about a woman getting disrespected anymore. It was about corporate power being challenged, about a system of inequality being exposed in real time. And the CEO, the woman who had been insulted, had no intention of letting it go. As the plane soared through the clouds, the CEO sat in her seat, her eyes closed. She wasn't tired. No, this wasn't about exhaustion. She was just calm, silent. But inside, her mind was working at full speed. She had built an empire from the ground up, and no one, not even the flight attendant who had humiliated her, could take that away from her. She had dealt with disrespect before. She had been underestimated, overlooked, and pushed aside. But this time, it was different. This time, the power had shifted. She wasn't the one on the receiving end of the judgment. She was the one who held all the cards now. Her assistant, Rachel, had already informed her that the board was involved. The emails had been sent. The protocol was in motion. But the CEO knew that the true consequence of this incident wasn't going to be a simple reprimand. No, this was going to be far-reaching. She was going to make sure that the entire company understood the gravity of what had just occurred. The CEO wasn't just going to take down the flight attendant. She was going to use this moment to send a message that no one, no matter their position, would ever be allowed to treat others with such disrespect again. As she thought about what would happen when the flight landed, she realized this wasn't just about her. This wasn't just about a single flight attendant. This was about everyone who had been told they didn't belong. It was about every person who had been judged based on their appearance, their race, their clothes. It was about a system that had allowed this kind of discrimination to thrive unchecked. The plane began its descent toward its destination, and the CEO could feel her heart rate pick up. This was the moment of truth. This was when everything would change. As the plane touched down and the passengers started to gather their belongings, the flight attendant couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She had tried to ignore it earlier, to push it aside, but now it was inescapable. She had crossed a line, and now she would have to face the consequences. She tried to steady her hands as she helped passengers deboard, but her nerves were shot. Every step felt heavier than the last. As she moved through the terminal, she couldn't help but notice the eyes on her, the whispers behind her back. It was as if the entire airport knew what had happened, even though only a few passengers had witnessed the incident firsthand. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. And now, she had to wait. She had to wait for the inevitable phone call from corporate, the call that would determine her fate. As the CEO made her way through the airport, she passed the flight attendants who had been on duty that day. They knew what had happened. They had heard the rumors. They had seen the tension in the cabin. But none of them knew the full story. None of them knew that the woman they had just insulted was the CEO of the airline. And none of them knew that their colleague, the one who had been so quick to judge, was about to face a reckoning unlike any she had ever known. The CEO stepped into the elevator, her eyes scanning the faces of the other passengers. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was simply waiting. Waiting for the moment when everything would fall into place, when the truth would come out, and when she would finally take control of the situation. The doors closed, and the elevator began its ascent, carrying her to the top floors of the airport. She had learned one thing today. Power could be silent, but when it was finally unleashed, it would always make its mark. As the elevator doors slid open, the CEO stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The quiet hum of the airport terminal seemed distant now. She was no longer just another passenger. She was on a mission, and this mission had just begun. Her assistant, Rachel, was waiting for her at the designated meeting point, a small cafe tucked away in the corner of the terminal. Rachel's face was a mixture of concern and readiness. She had been following the developments from her end, ensuring the protocol was running smoothly. "Everything is set up, ma'am," Rachel said as the CEO approached, her voice steady but laced with tension. "The corporate board is reviewing the incident. Internal audits are being initiated. We've already pulled the flight logs, the customer service interactions, and the security footage. The staff involved are being investigated." The CEO nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "Good. But this isn't just about them, Rachel. This is about showing everyone that we don't tolerate this kind of behavior in our company. Not ever again." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. But you're aware that the media is already picking up the story, right? Videos from passengers are going viral. People are already making judgment. The CEO's expression remained calm, but there was a fire in her eyes. Let them talk. They have no idea what they're really witnessing. They think this is about a flight attendant and a misunderstanding. It's not. This is about a system that has allowed people like her to feel like they have power over others. It's about the institutionalized prejudice that still exists in this world. And I'm going to make sure that the whole world sees it for what it is. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She knew better than to question her boss, but she had seen the emotional toll the situation was taking on her. The CEO had worked her entire life to get to the top, to build a legacy. And yet, here she was, fighting against something as basic as respect. "We've got the press ready," Rachel continued. "We can issue a statement, clarify our position, and shift the narrative if needed." "No," the CEO said, her voice firm. "We don't need to shift the narrative. We need to own it. The truth needs to come out. People need to understand that what happened today is not just an isolated incident. It's part of a much bigger problem, one that has been swept under the rug for too long. And now, it's time to bring it to the light." Rachel nodded again, the weight of her boss's words sinking in. The CEO wasn't just thinking about her own reputation or the company's image. She was thinking about the future, about making a real difference in how people treated each other. "Understood," Rachel said quietly. "So, what's next?" The CEO looked at her assistant, a hint of determination in her gaze. "We go public. We tell the world what happened. We let them see how deep the problem runs. And we make sure that those responsible face the consequences. No one is above accountability, not even the people who run this airline." As they made their way toward the private lounge, the CEO's phone buzzed. It was a message from her legal team. "The flight attendant has been placed on administrative leave. An internal investigation is underway. We've also received confirmation that the media outlets are preparing coverage. We'll be ready to respond immediately." The CEO read the message and tucked her phone back into her pocket. She didn't feel any relief, only a sense of clarity. This was just the beginning. She had made it clear to her company and to the world that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. But now, the hard part was coming, the public fallout. She knew the media would spin the story in every possible direction. Some would call it a powerful moment of justice, while others would criticize her actions as an overreaction. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that she had taken a stand, and no one would forget this moment. As they entered the private lounge, the CEO took a seat in one of the plush chairs, her mind already racing with the next steps. "Rachel," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "I want the press release ready. We need to be clear about what happened and why it matters. We need to set the tone for the conversation. We're not just defending our reputation, we're demanding change." Rachel quickly got to work, pulling out her laptop and preparing the necessary documents. The CEO sat back in her chair, her thoughts now focused. She had been underestimated. She had been belittled. But now, it was her turn to show everyone just how much power she truly had. This was no longer just about an airline. This was about creating a world where respect wasn't a privilege, it was a right. The CEO smiled to herself as she looked out the window, the city skyline stretching out before her. This was just the beginning, and she was ready for the fight ahead. The next morning, the CEO woke up to a storm. Her phone was flooded with notifications, some from her legal team, some from the media, and many from the countless messages pouring in from the public. The story of what happened on the flight had already gone viral. Videos of the flight attendant confronting the woman, followed by the shocking revelation of her identity, had spread like wildfire across social media. Opinions were divided. Some hailed her as a hero, applauding her composure and the justice she was about to bring to a deeply flawed system. Others, however, accused her of making a scene over nothing, of using her position to silence an innocent flight attendant. But the CEO knew one thing for certain: the attention the story had garnered was only the beginning. As she scrolled through the messages, she noticed a pattern. There were a lot of people who related to her experience, people who had been judged by their appearance, who had been dismissed simply because of their skin color, their attire, or their background. She could feel their frustration, their pain, and in a way, it gave her a sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for them. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Rachel. "The media is requesting an official statement. We need to act fast before the story spins out of control." The CEO put the phone down, rubbing her temples. She had known this would happen. The media would twist the narrative, would frame her as either a victim or a villain depending on which angle they decided to take. But what mattered was the truth. And the truth was simple. This was about accountability. She wasn't going to let the conversation be hijacked. "Rachel," she said, her voice steady, "I'm ready. We're not going to let this be about me. This is about the system that allowed this behavior to go unchecked. Make sure the statement is clear. We need to own this and make it about change." Rachel replied with a quick acknowledgement, and the CEO could hear the typewriter-like click of the assistant typing away on the other end of the line. The CEO stood and walked over to the window, gazing out at the city below. Her mind was already strategizing her next moves. This wasn't just about punishing the flight attendant. No, it was about using this moment to dismantle the ingrained biases that existed within her company and, by extension, the industry at large. She knew this was a battle, but it was one she had to win not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been silenced or overlooked. Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzzing of her phone again. This time, it was a call from her public relations team. "We've received a lot of backlash, ma'am. The public is divided, and some major influencers are criticizing you for escalating the situation. There's even talk about boycotting the airline." The CEO sighed, knowing this was coming. "I don't care about the noise, but what we need to make clear is the message. This is not about one incident. This is about changing the culture. If they want to boycott, let them. But the message will remain the same." Her tone was firm, unwavering. "The flight attendant will face the consequences of her actions, but the company will take this moment to educate and improve. We will not sweep this under the rug." "Understood, ma'am," the public relations officer responded, clearly relieved that the CEO wasn't wavering under the pressure. "We're drafting the statement, but we'll need your approval before it goes out." "Send it over to me," the CEO replied, hanging up. She sat down at her desk and began to read the statement. It was well-written, clear, and focused on the issue at hand. It emphasized the company's commitment to accountability, fairness, and respect for all individuals, regardless of their race, gender, or socioeconomic status. It acknowledged the incident and expressed regret that it had occurred, but it also stressed that such behavior would not be tolerated. As the CEO read through it, she felt a surge of pride. This was exactly what needed to be said. She made a few minor edits and then sent it back to Rachel with her approval. "Send it out," she instructed. Within minutes, the statement was live on every major media outlet. The reaction was swift. Some praised the CEO for taking responsibility and making a bold statement, while others criticized her for taking too long to speak out. But it didn't matter. The wheels were in motion. Now it was time to face the aftermath. The CEO took a deep breath and prepared for the calls that would follow. She had done what she could to ensure that the story was being told on her terms. Now, she would see how far the ripple effects would go. The phone rang again. This time, it was a call from the airline's board of directors. The CEO answered, knowing full well what was coming next. "We've reviewed the situation, and we need to discuss the future of this particular staff member," the chairman said, his voice serious. The CEO nodded, her mind already calculating the next steps. "I agree, let's discuss it." As the conversation continued, the CEO knew that her actions had sparked something bigger than herself. This was a turning point, not just for the airline, but for the entire industry. She would fight for a system where equality and respect were standard, not privileges. And with every step she took, she knew she was shaping a future where no one would ever have to face the kind of discrimination she had endured again. The days following the press release were a whirlwind of activity. The media circus had begun, and the story was everywhere. On television, on social media, in every corner of the internet, people were still talking about what happened. The viral videos of the confrontation on the plane had been dissected from every angle, and now the world was waiting to see what the CEO would do next. Some called her a hero, others a villain. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that she had sparked a much-needed conversation about power, race, and respect in the workplace. But for the CEO, this wasn't just about public opinion. This was about creating real change, a change that could alter the way her industry and the world viewed people like her. The phone calls were relentless. She had just finished another round of interviews when Rachel came in with an update. "Ma'am, the board is calling for a meeting. They want to discuss the actions taken and what comes next," Rachel said, her voice neutral but holding the weight of the moment. The CEO sighed, standing up and adjusting her jacket. "I know. Let's go. It's time we put this all on the table." As they walked into the meeting room, The faces of the board members were serious, tense. They all knew that the CEO's decision to go public had changed everything. The airline's reputation was at stake, but there was also the possibility of using this moment to transform the company. The chairman of the board spoke first. "We've seen the media coverage, and we've read the statement. But now, we need to figure out the next steps. How do we handle the fallout? And what about the flight attendant involved? There are calls for her termination. What's your stance?" The CEO sat down, her posture straight, her expression calm. She had been through countless meetings like this, but today felt different. She wasn't here to make excuses. She was here to make change. "We need to do what's right," she said, her voice steady. "We are a company that stands for respect, for accountability. What happened on that flight was a direct result of the culture we've allowed to fester within our ranks. Yes, the flight attendant will face consequences, but the true responsibility lies with all of us, at every level. This isn't just about firing one person. It's about looking at our company culture and making sure this never happens again." The board members exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, others nodded, but they all knew that this was not a conversation they could shy away from. "You're suggesting systemic change?" one of the members asked. "That's going to take time, resources, and a lot of work. Are we ready for that?" The CEO leaned forward, her eyes locked on the board members. "We have to be ready. If we're not willing to make these changes, then we're part of the problem. If we're not willing to lead by example, then what kind of company are we running? We have the opportunity to do something truly transformative, to set the standard for this industry. But we need to act now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now." The room fell silent. The gravity of her words hung in the air. The CEO could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but she knew it was the right one. This was her moment to redefine her company, to set a precedent for how businesses should operate, not just in terms of profits, but in terms of people. After a few moments of quiet deliberation, the chairman of the board spoke again. "You're right. We can't ignore the culture we've created, but we also have to be mindful of the public reaction. If we go too far, we risk losing loyal customers, and if we don't do enough, we risk looking like we're not serious about change." The CEO nodded. "I understand the concerns, but we can't let fear dictate our actions. If we want to be a true leader in this industry, we have to be bold. We have to show the world that we're not afraid to confront uncomfortable truths and take the necessary steps to fix them." There was a long pause before another board member spoke. "So what's the next step?" The CEO took a deep breath and smiled. "First, we'll put together a comprehensive diversity and inclusion plan, one that addresses systemic biases and sets clear guidelines for behavior. We'll offer training for all employees, not just the ones in customer-facing roles. But we won't stop there. We'll hold ourselves accountable by publishing our progress and allowing independent audits to ensure we're living up to the standards we set. And as for the flight attendant, she'll be given the opportunity to be part of this change. She'll go through the same training, and if she's willing to acknowledge her actions and learn, she'll be allowed to return to work." The board members were silent for a moment, processing the CEO's words. It was clear that this was not going to be a quick fix. It was going to take time, effort, and a commitment to change from every level of the company. But in that moment, the CEO knew they were headed in the right direction. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing the logistics of the new plan, the resources required, and the timeline for implementation. As the meeting adjourned, the CEO felt a sense of relief wash over her. This was the first step in a long journey, but it was a journey she was ready to take. As she walked out of the boardroom, Rachel followed closely behind. "You did well, ma'am," Rachel said quietly. "The board is on board, and the first steps are in motion." The CEO nodded, her mind already focused on the work ahead. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. "There's a long road ahead, but I'm ready to walk it." The following weeks were a whirlwind of action, pressure, and change. The CEO and her team worked tirelessly to roll out the new diversity and inclusion plan. Internal training programs were set up, focusing on bias awareness, cultural competence, and respect. Every employee, from the frontline staff to the top executives, was required to participate. The airline was about to be transformed, and the CEO knew it had to start from the ground up. She wasn't just putting together a training session, she was changing the culture of the entire company. Meanwhile, the public reaction to the company's new stance was mixed. The media continued to report on the aftermath of the flight incident, and the CEO's decisions were met with both praise and backlash. On one hand, many admired her for standing up against discrimination and for putting accountability at the forefront. On the other hand, some questioned the extent to which the flight attendant's actions warranted such a major shift in company culture. Despite the criticisms, the CEO remained focused. She knew that the changes she was implementing were necessary and long overdue. The company's values were shifting from profit-driven to people-first, and though the transition wasn't going to be easy, she believed it would make them stronger in the long run. As part of the initiative, the CEO personally met with some of the employees from various departments, flight attendants, pilots, and ground crew members to hear their thoughts and concerns. She wanted to understand how they viewed the new changes and whether they felt heard. One afternoon, she sat down with a group of flight attendants. As they gathered in the lounge, the room was filled with an air of cautious optimism, but also some lingering skepticism. The CEO, who had been through countless corporate meetings, was accustomed to this kind of tension. But today, she wasn't the CEO in her high-rise office today. She was a listener, a leader who wanted to hear the truth. "Thank you all for taking the time to meet with me," she began, her voice steady but warm. "I know the last few weeks have been difficult, but I want to assure you that we are committed to making real changes. This isn't just about one incident. This is about creating a company where every single one of you feels valued and respected, no matter your background." There was a pause, and then one of the flight attendants spoke up. "It's easy for you to say that, but for some of us, the system has been broken for a long time. I've seen how new hires are treated based on their appearance. I've seen the favoritism, the way some people get opportunities just because they look the part." Another flight attendant nodded. "It's not just one person, it's the whole culture. It's the way we've been taught to put on a mask and pretend that everything is fine when we know it's not. We've been trained to follow orders, not question them." The CEO listened carefully, feeling the weight of their words. She knew that these were hard truths, but they were also the starting point for the transformation she had promised. "I hear you," she said softly, looking around the room at each of them. "This company has failed you in the past, and I won't pretend that it hasn't. But we're changing that. We're going to address the biases, the favoritism, and the toxic culture that has existed for far too long. And I'm asking you to hold me accountable. If you don't see progress, if you feel like we're slipping back into old habits, you have every right to speak up." There was a long silence before one of the flight attendants spoke again. "We've heard promises before. Change is hard, and it's even harder when the people at the top don't listen. But if you're really serious about this, you have to prove it. It's not enough to put out a statement and offer some training. We need to see real action. We need to see the people who perpetuate this behavior held accountable." The CEO nodded. "I understand. And I promise you, this is just the beginning. We're not stopping with the training. We're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination at all levels, and we're going to create clear reporting systems so that everyone, no matter their role, has the ability to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. But I need your help. I need you to be honest with me, to tell me what's really happening on the ground. Only then can we fix it." The flight attendants exchanged looks, some nodding while others still appeared doubtful. But for the first time, the CEO could feel that they were starting to trust her. It wasn't going to be easy to change a culture that had been entrenched for so long, but it was possible, and she was committed to seeing it through. Over the next few weeks, the CEO continued to meet with employees at every level, gathering feedback and implementing changes. The company started to take bold steps toward diversity and inclusion, but it was clear that there was still much work to be done. The flight attendant who had been involved in the incident was sent for training, and after a thorough review, she was allowed to return to work, though with a probationary period to ensure that she understood the gravity of her actions. The CEO was determined to show the world that true leadership wasn't about maintaining power, it was about empowering others. As the company slowly started to change, so too did the public's perception. The media, initially skeptical, began to acknowledge the efforts the CEO was making. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was progress. The CEO knew that the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but she also knew that they were on the right path. And as she stood at the helm of the company, leading the way through the storm, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just about fixing an isolated incident. This was about reshaping an entire industry. And in the end, that was a fight worth fighting. Months passed. and the effects of the CEO's sweeping changes began to show. The training programs were now a staple within the company, and employees were participating in workshops that taught them how to handle unconscious bias, how to treat every passenger with dignity and respect, and how to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, felt like they belonged. The company's leadership, from top to bottom, had adopted new policies and made a visible effort to listen to their employees. While there were still a few skeptics, many were beginning to see the real difference. The CEO had not only faced a crisis, but turned it into an opportunity for systemic change, and her determination was palpable. Yet, there were still challenges to face. The media had largely moved on from the viral incident, but the CEO knew that the public's attention could turn back at any time. That meant staying ahead of any potential setbacks and ensuring that the company was continuing to walk the talk. The flight attendant who had been involved in the original incident had returned to work, now actively participating in the training programs herself. She had learned from her actions and had shown the company that she was willing to change. However, the CEO knew that the true measure of progress was not in the individual changes but in how the entire organization was evolving. One morning, as the CEO was reviewing reports, she received a call from one of her senior executives, Martin. "We've got a situation," he said, his voice tight. "There's been another incident on a flight. A passenger claims they were discriminated against by one of our flight attendants. They've posted about it on social media, and the backlash is already starting." The CEO's heart sank. She had been hoping that the hard work they had put in to address systemic issues would lead to real change, but she knew better than to believe that everything would be fixed overnight. "Where did it happen?" she asked, her voice steady despite the worry creeping into her chest. "Flight 217, New York to Miami," Martin replied. "The passenger claims the flight attendant gave them attitude when they asked for assistance. It's already getting some traction on Twitter." The CEO's mind immediately went into overdrive. She had prepared for this possibility. No matter how much progress they had made, there would always be those who resisted change, those who still believed in the old ways. But this was not the time to panic. This was the time to lead. "I want a full report on my desk in 1 hour," she said firmly. "Get all the details, find out if there's any video footage, and speak to the passengers who were involved." She hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The work they had done wasn't perfect, and it wasn't foolproof, but it was a step in the right direction. The challenge now was to prove that the airline was still committed to its new values, even in the face of setbacks. She gathered her team in the conference room, her mind focused and determined. "Here's the situation," she said as she stood before them, her voice commanding attention. "We've had an incident, and it's being talked about. We need to handle it with transparency and integrity. This is not about covering up or ignoring the issue. This is about showing that we are committed to the changes we've promised. We will handle this with the same level of accountability and respect that we expect from everyone in this company." Her team nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. "Rachel," the CEO continued, "I want you to draft a statement for the media, and let's get our legal team involved immediately. I want to make sure we're prepared for anything. And Martin, I need you to lead the investigation. Get the facts, and make sure we're talking to everyone involved. This isn't just about defending our reputation. This is about continuing the work we started." The team set to work quickly, dividing tasks and assigning responsibilities. The CEO remained focused, her eyes scanning the room as her team worked in tandem. She knew that leadership wasn't just about making the tough decisions, it was about taking ownership of the situation and guiding her team through it, even when things weren't going according to plan. The hours that followed were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and updates. As the investigation progressed, the facts started to come to light. It turned out that the flight attendant in question had been dealing with a difficult passenger, someone who was already upset when they boarded the plane. The passenger had claimed that the flight attendant was dismissive and rude when they asked for assistance. But after speaking with multiple witnesses, it became clear that the flight attendant had done nothing wrong. The passenger had been upset over a delayed flight and had taken their frustration out on the staff. The flight attendant had responded with professionalism, but the passenger had misinterpreted the situation. The CEO reviewed the findings with her team, her face unreadable. "This is good news," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of resolve. "The flight attendant did nothing wrong, but we still need to address the situation. The passenger's claims were serious, and we can't ignore that. We need to issue a statement that not only clears our employee, but also reinforces our commitment to accountability. This is an opportunity to show that we're walking the walk, not just talking the talk." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. "I want the statement to be clear. We take every complaint seriously, and we will always investigate thoroughly. But we will also stand behind our employees when they follow our values and policies. And we will not allow our company to be used as a platform for false accusations." As they finalized the statement, the CEO couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility she carried. This wasn't just about one flight attendant or one passenger. This was about the culture of her company and the example they were setting for the industry. The public might not see it that way, but she knew that these small moments, these tough decisions, were what would define the future of her company. When the statement went live, the public's reaction was swift. Many applauded the CEO for standing by her employee and for being transparent about the investigation. Others still criticized the airline, questioning why it had taken so long to address the issue. But the CEO wasn't worried about the criticisms. She knew that the road to change was never easy, but as long as they stayed true to their values, they would continue to move forward. The incident, though challenging, had reaffirmed one thing. The work they had done to change the culture of the airline was far from over. But with each challenge, they were getting stronger. And the CEO knew that she would face every new obstacle with the same resolve, the same commitment to justice and equality. She had started this journey to make a difference, and she wasn't about to stop now. Weeks passed, and the efforts to overhaul the company's culture were starting to show tangible results. The CEO could feel the shift, even if it was gradual. Employees across the airline were beginning to embrace the diversity and inclusion programs, and while there were still some pockets of resistance, the majority were starting to see the value in these changes. The conversations in the hallways had changed. People were no longer simply following orders, they were engaging in discussions about fairness, respect, and how to make the company better for everyone. Yet, despite the progress, the CEO knew that the true measure of success wouldn't come from internal metrics or positive media coverage. It would come from the small, everyday moments when employees and customers felt the difference. As she sat in her office one afternoon, reviewing reports and thinking about the company's future, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel. "Ma'am, there's something you need to see. We've received an anonymous tip. A video has surfaced that claims one of our flight attendants made discriminatory remarks to a passenger." The CEO's heart sank. She had hoped that the worst was behind them, that the changes they had worked so hard to implement would be enough to prevent incidents like this from happening again. But this was a harsh reminder that real change took time and setbacks were inevitable. The CEO quickly gathered her team for an emergency meeting. As she walked into the conference room, she could see the concerned looks on everyone's faces. Rachel was already there, holding her tablet with the video queued up. The CEO took a deep breath, preparing herself for whatever was about to unfold. "Play it," she said, her voice calm but firm. The video began to play, showing a flight attendant speaking to a passenger with what appeared to be a dismissive attitude. The passenger was upset about a small issue, something that, in the past, would have been dealt with calmly. But in the video, the flight attendant seemed irritated and made a snide comment about the passenger's appearance. The passenger, visibly upset, began recording, and the video quickly escalated. "This is not good," the CEO said quietly as the video finished. "Not good at all. We've come so far, and now this. We've worked hard to rebuild trust, and this threatens to undo everything." Rachel nodded, her expression tight. "We've traced the video back to the flight from a few days ago. The passenger claims that the flight attendant insulted them repeatedly and even rolled their eyes when they asked for help." The CEO leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had promised to hold everyone in the company accountable, from the highest executives to the lowest-ranking employees. This flight attendant was no different. "I want to know everything," she said, her voice resolute. "Get all the details. I want to know the full context. What was said, who was involved, and why this happened." The team quickly split up to start the investigation, but the CEO couldn't shake the feeling of frustration. This wasn't the first time a situation like this had occurred. No matter how much they trained and educated, no matter how many programs they implemented, there would always be those who resisted. There would always be those who believed they were above the changes happening around them. It was a sobering thought, but the CEO refused to let it discourage her. This was exactly why the work they were doing was so important. Every setback, every challenge, was a reminder of how much further they still had to go. Hours later, the team reconvened with the findings. The flight attendant involved in the incident had a history of complaints, some of which had been swept under the rug in the past. While this particular incident seemed like an isolated event, it was clear that the flight attendant's behavior had been tolerated for far too long. The CEO was silent as she processed the information. "I should have known," she muttered under her breath. "I should have addressed this sooner. The signs were there." Rachel spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. "Ma'am, we can't fix everything overnight, but you're doing the right thing. You're making the changes that need to happen. This will be a bump in the road, but it won't stop the progress we've made." The CEO nodded, appreciating Rachel's support. "You're right, but this is bigger than just one flight attendant. This is about the system that allowed this to happen. I've been saying for weeks that this isn't just about making one incident right. It's about changing the way we do things, holding people accountable, all the time." She stood up from her desk, pacing the room. "I've made a commitment to this company and to our employees, and that means we have to be consistent. We can't let things slide, not now, not ever again." The CEO made a decision then and there. The flight attendant involved in the incident would be placed on immediate suspension, pending further review. But it wasn't just the flight attendant who needed to be held accountable. The entire system had failed, allowing this behavior to persist unchecked. It was time to put an end to it once and for all. The CEO addressed the team. "We will take full responsibility for this. I want a statement drafted immediately. We need to own up to our failure. We can't hide from this. And we need to show that we're willing to take decisive action when it comes to accountability." The team moved quickly, working with legal and communications to craft the response. The CEO was determined to set the right example, no matter the backlash. As the statement was released to the press, it was clear that the company was not backing down. The CEO didn't shy away from the truth. She acknowledged the failure, expressed regret, and promised to take swift action. The flight attendant would be given the opportunity to learn and grow, but the company's zero-tolerance policy would be enforced. The public reaction was mixed. Some praised the CEO for taking swift and decisive action, while others felt the company was only trying to save face. But for the CEO, the most important thing was not the public's reaction. It was about the long-term impact of her decisions. She knew this was just another step on the journey to changing the culture of her company, and she would not stop until that change was complete. The weeks that followed the incident were some of the most challenging yet rewarding moments in the CEO's career. The suspension of the flight attendant had stirred up more media attention, but the company's decisive stance on accountability had also earned the respect of many, both inside and outside of the organization. It wasn't easy, though. There were still critics who believed the company had overreacted, while others argued that the CEO hadn't done enough. The pressure was constant, but the CEO stood firm in her resolve. She knew that it was the right thing to do, even if it wasn't the popular thing to do. She had made a promise to her employees, to the passengers, and to herself. She was going to change the culture, and nothing was going to stop her. In the midst of the scrutiny, the CEO continued to push forward, working alongside her leadership team to implement the changes they had promised. They had begun to roll out the new diversity and inclusion initiatives, offering regular training to employees at all levels. There were also new reporting systems in place to ensure that any instances of discrimination, no matter how small, were addressed immediately. The changes weren't just surface level, they were systemic. The CEO knew that the work she had started would take years to fully implement, but the progress was already evident. People were beginning to speak up. Employees were more engaged than ever before, offering suggestions, sharing concerns, and truly feeling like they had a voice in the company. It was a culture shift, and it was happening one step at a time. One day, as the CEO was sitting in her office, reviewing the company's latest performance metrics, Rachel walked in with a stack of reports. "Ma'am, the results from the diversity and inclusion surveys have come back. There's been a noticeable improvement in employee satisfaction, especially among the more marginalized groups. The training programs are showing positive results as well." The CEO took the report and scanned it quickly, her heart lifting as she saw the numbers. "This is good," she said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "But we can't stop here. This is just the beginning. We've created a foundation, but we need to continue building on it." Rachel nodded. "Absolutely. And we've also received positive feedback from passengers. They've noticed the change in the staff, the way they're treated, and the atmosphere on flights. It's working. The CEO smiled, but there was still a lingering sense of caution. It's working, yes, but we need to ensure that it continues to work. We can't just make one change and assume the problem is solved. We need to keep our eyes open, stay vigilant, and make sure that we are always moving forward. Later that day, the CEO received an unexpected call. It was from the flight attendant who had been involved in the incident. She had been on suspension for several weeks and had undergone additional training. The CEO had already decided that, based on her progress, she would be allowed to return to work. But the flight attendant wanted to speak directly with the CEO. "I've learned a lot," the flight attendant said, her voice shaky over the phone. "I understand now how my actions hurt that passenger. I didn't see it at the time, but I see it now. I didn't realize how much my own bias was influencing the way I treated people. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I'm ready to come back, but I want to do it right. I want to make sure I'm part of the solution, not part of the problem." The CEO paused for a moment, taken aback by the flight attendant's sincerity. She had expected an apology, but she hadn't expected the depth of reflection that the flight attendant had gone through. "I appreciate your honesty," the CEO said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm glad to hear that you've learned from this. You've always had the potential to be a great part of this company, but it's clear that you needed to take some time to understand how your actions fit into the bigger picture. We've put systems in place to help employees grow, and we're going to give you the opportunity to continue that growth." The flight attendant thanked the CEO, and the two of them spoke for a few more minutes before ending the call. The CEO felt a sense of relief, but also a deep sense of responsibility. This was the moment she had been working toward, the moment when accountability didn't just mean punishment, but also growth and understanding. The CEO knew that this moment would define the future of the company. If they could hold people accountable while also allowing them the chance to change and grow, they would set a new standard for the industry. The next day, the flight attendant was reinstated with a probationary period. She would be under close observation as she continued to work through her training. But the CEO was confident that she had made the right decision. The company was on the right path. Still, there was work to be done. There would always be setbacks, always be challenges. But the CEO had learned that true leadership was not about avoiding mistakes, it was about how you handled them. It was about owning up to them, learning from them, and using those lessons to build something stronger. As she looked out of her office window, watching the planes take off and land, she felt a deep sense of pride in the company's progress. The path had been difficult, but it had been worth it. She wasn't just running an airline, she was leading a movement, and that movement, she knew, was only getting started. Months passed, and the CEO's vision for a more inclusive and accountable company was slowly becoming a reality. The airline, once known for its impersonal service and outdated policies, was now recognized as a leader in diversity and inclusion. The company's commitment to systemic change had begun to yield results, and although the work was far from finished, the CEO could feel the tide turning. She was often approached by employees, passengers, and even competitors, all acknowledging the changes that were being made. Still, the challenges didn't stop. As the company's internal culture continued to shift, there were inevitable growing pains. The training programs were helping, but not everyone was on board. Some employees struggled to accept the changes, resistant to the idea that their behavior had to be examined, their biases confronted. The CEO knew this wasn't just about implementing policies or issuing statements, it was about creating a new mindset, a new way of thinking about each other, about respect, and about the role they played in shaping the company. That evening, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, the CEO sat alone in her office, reflecting on the journey so far. She had never imagined it would be easy, but the level of resistance within the company surprised her. It wasn't that people were openly hostile to the changes, they just didn't fully grasp the significance. But the CEO was determined to push forward. The phone rang, breaking her train of thought. It was Rachel. "Ma'am, I have an update on the results of our latest employee feedback survey. There's been some positive progress, but it's clear that we still have work to do." The CEO sighed, setting the phone down and leaning back in her chair. "Tell me what you found." "Well," Rachel began, "overall satisfaction has increased across the board, but we're seeing some pushback from employees in specific departments, mainly among long-tenured staff. Some of them feel like the new initiatives are too much, too fast. They think the changes are too drastic. The CEO furrowed her brow. What exactly are they saying? It's mostly about the frequency of the training and the new reporting systems. They feel like they're being micromanaged. There's also frustration over some of the new expectations regarding behavior in customer service interactions. They feel like they're being judged, and that can feel uncomfortable. The CEO nodded, understanding the sentiment. We knew there would be some resistance. This isn't about making everyone happy, it's about doing what's right. But I understand the concerns. We need to make sure that the changes aren't overwhelming. Let's set up some more focused discussions with those departments. We need to hear their concerns directly and address them head-on. Rachel agreed. I'll get that organized, but we'll need to act fast. There are murmurs of discontent growing, and I can feel the momentum starting to slow down. The CEO took a deep breath. This is where true leadership comes in. We can't afford to let resistance derail the progress we've made. I'll be personally involved in those meetings. We'll have an open conversation, and I'll make sure they know that this isn't about blame or punishment. This is about improving our company together. The next few days were filled with conversations and feedback sessions with employees from different departments. The CEO listened intently as long-tenured staff shared their frustrations. They were scared that their jobs would change too much, scared of losing their place in a system they had known for so long. But she also saw the glimmer of hope in their eyes when they realized that she wasn't there to lecture them or criticize them. She was there to understand and work with them. The CEO didn't have all the answers, but she had the courage to listen and the determination to keep moving forward. After these sessions, the company adjusted its approach. The training programs became more flexible, with opportunities for employees to discuss their concerns and voice their experiences. The new reporting systems were streamlined to make them less intimidating, focusing on providing constructive feedback rather than punitive measures. Slowly but surely, the employees began to feel more comfortable with the changes. They realized that the culture shift wasn't about changing who they were. It was about improving how they interacted with one another and how they served their customers. As time went on, the CEO saw the first real signs of success. The complaints about the new policies began to taper off, and a new sense of camaraderie began to emerge. The employees felt heard, respected, and empowered to be part of the transformation. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of resistance, but the CEO could feel the company heading in the right direction. Then, out of nowhere, the CEO received an invitation to a high-profile leadership summit. The summit, held in Washington, D.C., was a gathering of executives from across various industries, and the CEO had been invited to speak about the company's transformation. It was a huge honor. The CEO spent days preparing for the event, focusing on how to communicate the progress the company had made, while emphasizing the broader implications of creating a truly inclusive and equitable workplace. As the day of the summit arrived, the CEO felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was her chance to speak to a broader audience and share the message she had been working so hard to promote. The room was filled with leaders from the tech industry, retail, healthcare, and many other sectors. As the CEO stepped up to the podium, she could feel the weight of the moment. She wasn't just representing her company. She was representing every employee who had fought for change, every passenger who had ever been treated unfairly, and every person who had ever been underestimated. She spoke from the heart, sharing the journey of her company and the lessons learned along the way. "It hasn't been easy," she said to the audience, "but it has been worth it. We've learned that change is uncomfortable. It's messy. It requires listening to people, understanding their fears, and addressing their concerns. It requires taking bold action, even when it's difficult. But most importantly, it requires a commitment to doing what's right, no matter the obstacles." As she finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. The CEO felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for everyone who had helped make the changes possible. She knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but in that moment, she also knew that she had started something that would leave a lasting impact, not just on her company, but on the entire industry. The weeks that followed the leadership summit brought a sense of momentum, but also new challenges. The CEO's speech had garnered significant attention, not only from the media, but also from other businesses. There were many companies looking to her as an example of how to navigate difficult conversations and create meaningful change. But the praise and recognition also brought new scrutiny. Now, the CEO was being asked to be more than just a corporate leader. She was being asked to be a role model for an entire industry. The pressure was immense, but the CEO was ready. She had committed to transforming her company, and now she had the responsibility to ensure that the lessons learned were shared and that the changes made were sustainable. Her days were packed with meetings and follow-ups. She met with other CEOs who wanted to learn about the diversity and inclusion programs she had implemented, and she spent hours working with her team to refine the strategies that had been successful. The pressure was relentless, but she didn't back down. One day, as she sat in her office, reviewing reports and emails, she received a call from one of her senior executives. It was Martin, the same executive who had worked closely with her during the early days of the crisis. "Ma'am, we've got a situation," he said, his tone serious. "There's been a social media post from one of our former employees, a flight attendant who was recently let go. They're accusing us of failing to follow through on the promises we made. They say that the changes we've implemented are only superficial and that we're still allowing discrimination to exist within the company." The CEO's heart sank. She knew that not everyone would be happy with the changes they had made, but she hadn't expected this. The post was gaining traction, and people were starting to question the authenticity of the company's transformation. "Where's this post coming from?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. "It's on Instagram. The employee was let go about a month ago after repeated behavioral issues. She's now claiming that the company is only pretending to change," Martin replied. The CEO felt a deep frustration well up inside her. She had worked tirelessly to make the right changes, and yet someone was accusing the company of not doing enough. The voice of doubt, which had been so prevalent in the early days of the crisis, was now making a comeback. She couldn't allow it to derail everything they had worked so hard to accomplish. "Get me the full details, and I want to see the post," the CEO said, standing up and walking over to the window. She needed to think clearly, to process the situation before reacting. Martin quickly provided the necessary information, and soon the CEO was reading the Instagram post herself. It was long, filled with personal accusations, and detailed the flight attendant's perspective on her termination. The post included claims that the company had only implemented changes to improve its image, but in reality, the same discriminatory practices still existed behind the scenes. The CEO took a deep breath. This wasn't just a random complaint, it was a direct challenge to the integrity of the company's efforts. She couldn't ignore it, and she couldn't let it fester. The public response was already beginning to build. Some sided with the former employee, while others defended the company. It was a divide that was all too familiar, and the CEO knew how easy it would be for the story to spiral out of control. "Rachel, get the communications team on this. We need a response, and we need it fast," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "But this time, we can't just respond. We need to show that we are committed to continuing the work. We need to show the world that the changes we've made are real and ongoing." Over the next few hours, the CEO worked with her team to craft a statement. It would be a delicate balance. She needed to acknowledge the former employee's concerns, while also reaffirming the company's commitment to its diversity and inclusion efforts. The statement would have to be transparent, honest, and direct. The CEO didn't just want to defend the company, she wanted to prove that they were not afraid to confront their shortcomings and that they were willing to learn from every mistake. When the statement was ready, it was published on the company's social media accounts. It acknowledged the criticism from the former employee, but it also emphasized the company's ongoing commitment to improving its culture. "We understand that the work we've started is far from complete," the statement read. "We are committed to continuing the journey, to holding ourselves accountable, and to ensuring that every person who works with us feels valued, respected, and heard. We do not claim to have all the answers, but we promise that we will keep listening, keep learning, and keep growing." The statement was met with mixed reactions. Some people applauded the company for being transparent, while others questioned whether the company was truly changing or just paying lip service to the issue. The CEO knew that the response was just the beginning. She couldn't afford to let this issue fester. She needed to take action. Over the next few days, the CEO arranged for several internal meetings. She met with senior leadership, human resources, and the diversity and inclusion team. She also made sure to speak with employees at every level of the organization. She wanted to hear from them directly about how they felt the company was progressing. The feedback was invaluable. Some employees felt that the changes were not being fully implemented in every department, while others expressed frustration that the company's efforts were not being matched with tangible actions. The CEO listened carefully to each concern, taking notes and asking questions. She knew that the company couldn't afford to be complacent, and that every setback was an opportunity to do better. As she walked out of the final meeting of the day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced criticism, but she had also found new allies within her organization. The CEO knew that there was still work to be done, but the path ahead was clearer than ever. She would continue pushing, continue challenging the status quo, and continue fighting for a company where every employee felt valued. It wasn't going to be easy, but she had never been one to back down from a fight. And this fight for equality, respect, and accountability, was one she would win. The days following the release of the statement were intense, with the CEO and her team working non-stop to manage the situation. The mixed reactions to their response showed just how complex the work ahead truly was. It wasn't enough to simply respond to a viral post. It was a reminder that the work of change needed to be continuous, and that no matter how much they had done, the fight for genuine progress would be ongoing. The CEO spent hours reviewing feedback, analyzing employee sentiment, and making sure the company's leadership was aligned. There were still lingering doubts among some employees, particularly those who had been with the company for a long time. They were the ones who had witnessed the old ways, the outdated practices, and the biases that had been allowed to persist. But what struck the CEO the most was the fact that many younger employees were now speaking out, expressing the desire to help drive the company's transformation. They were eager, passionate, and ready to contribute to building a better future for the organization. It was a shift that the CEO hadn't anticipated but deeply appreciated. She had always known that leadership was about more than making decisions at the top. It was about inspiring people at all levels to take ownership of the culture and to be accountable for their actions. It was about empowering them to make the changes they wanted to see, not just from the top down, but from the bottom up. That afternoon, as the CEO prepared for yet another round of meetings, her assistant Rachel brought in a report. "Ma'am, we've just received an invitation to participate in a major global conference on corporate responsibility. They want you to speak about your company's transformation, particularly around diversity and inclusion. It's a big opportunity to share our message with a broader audience." The CEO considered the invitation for a moment. Speaking at such an event would elevate the company's visibility and reaffirm their commitment to the changes they were making, but it also meant she would need to be ready to defend their progress, especially in light of the recent criticisms. She had already learned that true leadership meant acknowledging the challenges while highlighting the work being done. "Send them a confirmation," the CEO said. "I'll speak, but make sure we have all the data and the facts we need to back up our progress. We'll show them that we are not just talking about change, we're living it." As the date of the conference approached, the CEO and her team continued to refine their strategies. They focused on gathering data about their diversity and inclusion programs, collecting feedback from employees and passengers, and compiling evidence of tangible progress. The CEO knew that standing before a global audience meant having solid proof that the company wasn't just paying lip service to the idea of change. It was about showing that the company was committed to creating lasting, meaningful results. The day of the conference arrived, and the CEO stood backstage, preparing for her speech. The atmosphere was electric, with hundreds of industry leaders, activists, and journalists in attendance. She had spoken in front of large audiences before, but this was different. This was an opportunity to not only represent her company, but to speak to the wider issue of systemic discrimination and the importance of corporate responsibility in addressing it. As she stepped onto the stage, the CEO took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. She looked out at the audience, seeing a diverse group of people from all over the world, each of them waiting to hear what she had to say. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady but strong. "It is an honor to be here with you today to discuss something that has become very personal to me, the journey of transforming an organization to make it more inclusive, more respectful, and more responsible." She paused, allowing the words to resonate. "When I first took the helm of this airline, I inherited a company that was entrenched in outdated policies and a culture that, while not overtly hostile, allowed discrimination to fester in subtle ways. Like many organizations, we had biases, blind spots, and issues that we simply did not address. And while we took steps to make changes, we were never truly looking at the big picture, the system itself." The audience was quiet, listening intently. The CEO knew she had their attention, and she intended to make her message count. The turning point for us came when one of our employees, a flight attendant, made a comment that revealed how deep-seated some of our issues really were. It wasn't a single comment that caused the most harm, it was the fact that this kind of behavior had been allowed to persist, unchecked, for so long. That was the wake-up call. It was the moment when I realized we had to do more than just change policies. We had to change the way we viewed ourselves as a company and the way we treated others. She paused again, reflecting on how far they had come. We embarked on a journey of transformation, and while it wasn't easy, it was necessary. We rolled out comprehensive training, we established reporting systems, and we held ourselves accountable. We did not do this because it was convenient or because it was a trending topic. We did it because it was the right thing to do, and because we realized that by creating a more inclusive environment, we were making our company stronger, more innovative, and more resilient. The CEO looked out into the crowd, her eyes sweeping over the diverse faces in the audience. But our work is not done. We know that creating real change takes time, and we will continue to evolve. We will continue to listen, continue to learn, and continue to grow. This is not just a corporate initiative, it's a movement. One that I hope will inspire others to look at their own organizations and ask themselves, what can we do to make the world a better place? How can we lead with empathy, integrity, and respect for everyone? The audience erupted into applause, and the CEO allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She knew the journey was far from over, but in that moment, standing in front of industry leaders who were listening, she felt confident that the company was on the right path. The challenges ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer alone in this fight. The movement had grown beyond just her company. It had become a conversation that was rippling across industries, one that was forcing all leaders to examine their own cultures and values. And as she walked off the stage, the CEO knew that the future was bright if they stayed true to their mission, stayed committed to their values, and never lost sight of the people they were doing this for. In the months following the summit, the CEO's leadership and the airline's transformation continued to make waves across the corporate world. The company's efforts to reshape its culture were now seen as a benchmark for other organizations aiming to drive diversity, inclusion, and accountability within their ranks. But for the CEO, this was just the beginning. She was determined to ensure that the positive changes were not only sustainable, but that they would continue to evolve as the industry and the world around them changed. The challenges didn't stop, though. While many employees were now embracing the new culture, there were still moments of tension. Some employees had begun to push back against the new policies, claiming that the focus on diversity and inclusion was starting to overshadow the company's primary goal, delivering excellent service to its customers. There were also concerns that the company had become too focused on its internal culture, potentially neglecting the need to remain competitive in an increasingly crowded market. These concerns weighed heavily on the CEO, but she remained steadfast. She understood that the balance between fostering an inclusive culture and maintaining the airline's success was delicate. Her leadership team and she were constantly working to strike that balance, ensuring that the company could maintain its profitability while upholding the values they had promised to embrace. As the CEO sat in her office, reviewing the latest reports, she couldn't help but think about the future. What would the next phase of the company's transformation look like? How could they continue to push boundaries and lead the way in corporate responsibility, while ensuring that their employees and customers remained satisfied? She knew that the work ahead would require innovation, bold thinking, and a willingness to adapt. Just then, Rachel entered the room, holding a folder of updates. "Ma'am, the latest employee engagement survey results are in," she said, sitting down across from the CEO. "There's been a noticeable improvement in overall morale and job satisfaction, especially among the groups that were most impacted by the changes. But there's also been an increase in concerns about workload and stress. A number of employees feel like the new changes are adding pressure to their already demanding jobs." The CEO took the report and began scanning the results. She wasn't surprised by the feedback. Change, especially of the magnitude they had undertaken, could be overwhelming. But she knew that it was essential to address these concerns head-on. "What's the next step?" Rachel asked. "We can't ignore the burnout that some employees are feeling, but we also can't lose sight of the progress we've made." The CEO put the report down and looked at Rachel, her mind already working. We'll need to refine our approach, she said. We've done a great job with training and shifting the culture, but we also need to ensure that the workload is manageable. Let's put together a plan to address employee well-being more directly. It's clear that we need to find a way to strike a better balance between personal development and job performance. As Rachel left the room to begin working on the new plan, the CEO reflected on the state of the company. It had been a long and difficult journey, but they were seeing results. The airline was becoming more than just a business. It was becoming a model for how corporations could evolve to meet the needs of both their employees and customers in a world that was constantly changing. The CEO's phone rang. It was a call from the airline's chief marketing officer, Sarah. "Ma'am, I wanted to touch base about the upcoming ad campaign," Sarah said. "We're thinking about highlighting our commitment to diversity and inclusion, but we're also concerned about how it will be perceived. Do you think we're pushing too hard on the message?" The CEO smiled, appreciating Sarah's thoughtfulness. "No, we're not pushing too hard. This is a message we need to amplify. But let's make sure we're showing not just our commitment, but also the progress we've made. Let's highlight the real stories of our employees and how they've embraced the change. We're not just talking about diversity and inclusion, we're living it, and we want to show that through our actions and our people." Sarah agreed, and the CEO felt confident that the upcoming campaign would help solidify the company's position as a leader in corporate responsibility. It wasn't about putting out a perfect image, it was about showing the world that real change was possible, even in a giant corporation like theirs. As the weeks passed, the company's initiatives continued to grow. The new employee wellness programs were rolled out, focusing on mental health, work-life balance, and stress management. Feedback was positive, and employees appreciated that their well-being was being prioritized. The CEO attended more industry events, speaking about the company's journey and encouraging other businesses to follow suit. Despite the occasional pushback, the company's reputation continued to improve, and their growth trajectory remained strong. One day, as the CEO was walking through the airport, she was approached by a passenger who had flown with the airline many times. "Excuse me," the passenger said with a smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've noticed the changes on your flights. The service is so much better, and it feels like you really care about your employees. It's nice to see that you're not just about making money, you're doing good work." The CEO was taken aback by the comment. It wasn't often that passengers spoke directly to her, and it was rare for them to take the time to express appreciation for the company's internal changes. "Thank you," she replied, genuinely moved. "That means more than you know. We've worked hard to make those changes, and it's good to know that they're making a difference." As the passenger walked away, the CEO felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why they had done the work to make a difference in the lives of both their employees and customers. The work was far from over, but she had no doubt that the path they had set was the right one. As she stood in the airport, watching the planes take off, she knew that the company was no longer just a business. It was a movement, and that movement was only just beginning. As the year came to a close, the CEO found herself reflecting on the incredible journey her company had undertaken. There had been moments of triumph, moments of doubt, and plenty of challenges along the way, but through it all, the organization had emerged stronger and more united than ever before. The culture of the company had shifted in ways that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. Employees who once felt marginalized now felt heard, valued, and respected. Passengers who had experienced poor service or discrimination could now see the changes in the way they were treated. The company was no longer just a business, it was a living example of how transformation could happen when people, from the top down, were committed to doing the right thing. The CEO stood in her office, staring out the window at the city below, a sense of fulfillment slowly washing over her. She had led her team through one of the most difficult periods of the company's history, and now they were reaping the rewards. But the road ahead was far from over. There were still pockets of resistance within the organization, still some employees who felt uncomfortable with the changes. There were still customers who doubted the company's sincerity, and there were still others who questioned whether the cultural shift could truly be sustained in the long term. But the CEO was confident. She knew that the real test was not in how they handled the easy moments, but in how they responded to the difficult ones. The CEO had learned one of the most important lessons of leadership. Real change didn't happen overnight. It required commitment, persistence, and the courage to face discomfort and uncertainty head-on. The phone rang, snapping the CEO from her thoughts. It was Rachel. Ma'am, the results from our latest employee engagement survey are in, Rachel said. I think you're going to like what you see. The CEO's heart skipped a beat. Tell me. There's been a significant increase in overall satisfaction, especially in the areas of workplace culture and leadership transparency. The numbers are higher than they've ever been before, and we're seeing a positive shift in the way employees feel about their growth opportunities within the company. The CEO smiled, feeling a wave of pride wash over her. That's great news, Rachel. It means we're on the right track. But I'm sure there's still room for improvement, right? Of course, Rachel replied. There are still some areas that need work. For example, some employees are still concerned about workload, especially among the senior staff. We also need to continue to refine our diversity and inclusion programs to ensure that they remain relevant and impactful as the company grows. The CEO nodded thoughtfully. We'll keep refining. We can't ever stop improving. Absolutely, Rachel agreed. There's one more thing. We've received a request from a large industry group for you to speak at their annual conference next month. They're asking for you to share your company's story and the lessons learned during this journey. The CEO paused for a moment, considering the offer. She had spoken at a few conferences already, but this one felt different. This was a major opportunity to share her company's story with an even broader audience. It was a chance to inspire other leaders, to show them that change was possible, no matter how daunting it seemed. Let's do it, the CEO said, her voice firm. But I want to make sure that we are ready to talk not just about our successes, but about the struggles as well. We need to be transparent about the challenges we've faced. Only then can we truly show people what it takes to make a lasting impact. I'll get everything arranged, Rachel said, her tone filled with respect for the CEO's approach. As they prepared for the conference, the CEO spent time with her leadership team, refining their message and ensuring that their story was authentic and meaningful. She knew that her company's journey wasn't just about celebrating the good moments, it was about acknowledging the hard ones and learning from them. The day of the conference arrived, and the CEO stepped onto the stage in front of a packed auditorium. This time, it felt different. There were no nerves, no doubts. She had come a long way from the early days of the company's transformation. She was no longer the leader of a company that had simply weathered the storm. She was now a leader who had actively shaped the future. Good afternoon, she began, her voice strong. I stand before you today not just as the CEO of an airline, but as someone who has experienced firsthand what it takes to change an organization from the inside out. What I've learned over the past year is that transformation is not easy. It's uncomfortable, it's messy, and it requires all of us to take a hard look at ourselves and our assumptions. But it is also the most rewarding thing we can do. The moment we choose to make change, to do better, is the moment we create a company that is stronger, more innovative, and more capable of withstanding whatever challenges come our way. She paused, allowing the audience to absorb her words. When we began this journey, we knew it wouldn't be easy. We knew there would be resistance. But we also knew that if we wanted to be a company that truly made a difference, we couldn't shy away from the hard work. We couldn't let fear or complacency hold us back. We had to act, and act boldly. The CEO's voice was filled with conviction as she continued. We've made progress, but I won't pretend that we have all the answers. We still have work to do. There are still areas where we are falling short, and I will be the first to admit that. But we are committed to getting better. We are committed to creating a culture where every single person, no matter their race, background, or identity, feels valued. And we are committed to leading by example, showing the world that real change is not only possible, it is necessary. The audience erupted in applause, and the CEO felt a deep sense of pride. She had done it. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, she knew that the foundation had been laid. She had taken her company from a place of silence to a place of action, from a place of compliance to a place of transformation. And as she left the stage, she knew that the real work was just beginning. The future was bright, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was just the start of something far greater than herself. The months after the leadership conference were marked by steady growth and a renewed sense of purpose. The CEO had addressed the challenges head-on, and her message had resonated not just within her company but across the industry. Other organizations were beginning to look to her company as a model for how to navigate the complexities of corporate responsibility, diversity, and inclusion. The changes that had once seemed like a distant goal were now firmly in place, and the CEO could see the positive effects in every corner of her company. Employee engagement was at an all-time high, and the satisfaction scores from passengers were steadily climbing. Yet, despite the success, the CEO remained cautious. She knew that the work wasn't over. The company had made great strides, but the journey toward lasting, meaningful change would take time. She also understood that progress didn't mean perfection. Every challenge, every setback, was a reminder that there was always more to learn and room to grow. One afternoon, as the CEO sat at her desk reviewing company reports, she received a call from one of her key team members, Martin. "Ma'am, we've got a bit of a situation," he said, his tone a bit uneasy. "It's about the new employee feedback program. We've been collecting anonymous submissions, and there's one recurring theme that's starting to surface across departments. There are concerns that some of our diversity initiatives are being seen as too much of a priority, and employees are wondering if we're losing sight of our core business goals." The CEO frowned, her mind immediately racing through possible solutions. She knew this feedback was inevitable. Change was always accompanied by resistance, especially when it challenged established norms. "What exactly are they saying?" she asked. "Are they saying that the company's focus on diversity is hurting our performance?" "Not exactly," Martin replied. "It's more about the perceived imbalance. Some employees feel like the emphasis on diversity and inclusion has led to a shift in priorities, and they're worried it's affecting their ability to do their job. They think we're not balancing the cultural changes with our focus on operational efficiency and profitability." The CEO listened carefully, her mind working through the feedback. She had always known that there would be employees who would struggle to adapt to the changes. What concerned her more was the idea that the message might be misinterpreted, that the company was focusing more on diversity than on delivering quality service and maintaining high performance. "Let's get to the bottom of this," she said after a long pause. "I want to personally address the concerns. Schedule a meeting with the leadership team, and let's discuss how we can better communicate the balance between our cultural transformation and our business objectives." Martin agreed, and they set up the meeting for the following morning. As the CEO walked into the conference room the next day, she could see the apprehension on the faces of her leadership team. They knew how important it was to address these concerns quickly and effectively. "We need to make sure that our employees understand that diversity and inclusion are not separate from our business goals. They are a part of them," the CEO began, looking around the room. "Our company's success is built on the collective strength of our employees. When they feel respected, valued, and included, they are more engaged, more productive, and more likely to deliver exceptional service to our passengers. Diversity and inclusion aren't distractions. They are drivers of performance." The leadership team nodded in agreement, but the CEO could see that they were still uncertain about how to balance the two sides of the equation. "We've made great strides," the CEO continued, "but we need to communicate that the changes we've made aren't just about improving our culture, they are about making our company stronger. We can't afford to see this as two separate priorities. Diversity and inclusion are part of a larger strategy to enhance our competitiveness and efficiency." She paused to allow her words to sink in. "I want to make sure that every employee understands this. They need to see the direct connection between what we're doing and how it impacts our bottom line." The conversation turned to strategies for communicating this message more clearly. The CEO and her team brainstormed ideas for how to better articulate the connection between the company's culture and its business goals, ensuring that employees understood the importance of both. The CEO was resolute in her belief that diversity and inclusion were not just nice-to-have concepts, but essential elements for the company's growth. By the end of the meeting, the leadership team had developed a plan to reinforce this message across all levels of the organization. They would integrate the message into internal communications, hold town hall meetings, and launch a new initiative that highlighted how diversity had already positively impacted their operational success. The CEO was pleased with the plan. It was clear that, while there were still hurdles to overcome, the company was on the right track. As the meeting wrapped up, the CEO felt a sense of confidence. She knew that addressing the concerns of her employees head-on was the right approach. It wasn't about dismissing their concerns, it was about acknowledging them and reinforcing the connection between their work, the company's goals, and the ongoing transformation. Over the next few weeks, the new communication strategy was put into action. Town hall meetings were held across the company, with the CEO personally addressing employees and answering their questions about the company's direction. The message was clear. Diversity and inclusion were integral to the company's success, and the CEO was committed to ensuring that everyone, regardless of their role, understood how they contributed to the bigger picture. The results were immediate. Employee satisfaction scores began to rise again, and the concerns about the imbalance between diversity initiatives and business goals began to dissipate. It was a testament to the power of clear communication, but more importantly, it was proof that when employees felt included in the conversation, they were more invested in the company's success. The CEO was proud of what they had achieved, but she knew the work was far from over. The journey to transform a company was never easy, and there would always be new challenges to face. But with each success, the CEO felt more confident that they were on the right path. This was just the beginning, and the best was yet to come. As the year began to wind down, the CEO reflected on the incredible progress the company had made, but also on the hurdles still ahead. They had successfully shifted the corporate culture towards a more inclusive and equitable environment, but there were still areas in need of refinement. Employee engagement was at an all-time high, and the company's public image had improved, yet there was a growing understanding within the leadership team that to truly sustain their progress, they needed to continuously evolve. The CEO knew that it wasn't enough to simply maintain the changes they had made. They needed to ensure that these changes were deeply embedded in the organization's fabric. To do this, they would need to keep innovating, keep improving, and never become complacent. As the CEO sat in her office one afternoon, she received an unexpected call from the company's chief financial officer, Stephen. "Ma'am, I've been going through the latest financial projections and there's something we need to discuss," Stephen said, his tone cautious. "It looks like our operating costs have increased significantly this quarter. While the diversity and inclusion initiatives are important, we need to make sure we're not losing sight of the financial impact. We need to find a balance between cultural transformation and maintaining profitability." The CEO nodded, already bracing for the conversation she knew was coming. She had anticipated this issue for some time. While the company had made great strides in creating a more inclusive workplace, there was always the concern of financial sustainability. The company had invested significant resources into training programs, new initiatives, and employee well-being programs, and while these investments were necessary, they had affected the bottom line. "I understand, Stephen," the CEO replied, her voice calm. "We can't sacrifice profitability for progress, but we also can't allow ourselves to revert back to old ways just to balance the budget. We need to find a way to make sure that our diversity and inclusion initiatives continue to thrive while also being mindful of our financial health." Stephen agreed. "I've been working with the operations team to identify areas where we can cut costs without sacrificing the core values we've established. We're looking at streamlining some of our processes and evaluating vendor contracts to see where we can achieve savings. But I think we need to communicate more effectively with the rest of the team about why these investments are necessary." The CEO leaned forward in her chair, thinking deeply. "You're right. We need to make sure everyone understands why these initiatives matter not just for our company culture, but for our bottom line. I've said this before, but diversity and inclusion aren't just about doing the right thing, they're about improving performance, building a stronger company, and ensuring long-term success. Our employees are our greatest asset, and by investing in them, we're investing in the future of the company. But we can't do that without keeping an eye on the financials." The conversation shifted to specific actions they could take to align the company's goals with its budgetary needs. They discussed adjusting timelines for certain initiatives, rethinking the scope of some programs, and finding more cost-effective ways to integrate their diversity initiatives into daily operations without compromising quality. By the end of the meeting, the CEO felt more at ease. It was clear that the leadership team was committed to keeping the company on track financially while staying true to the values they had worked so hard to establish. As the weeks passed, the company began to implement a new approach to balancing their goals. There were minor adjustments made to their diversity training programs and other initiatives, but nothing that would undermine the progress they had made. Employees were informed of the changes in a transparent way, and the company emphasized the importance of adapting while remaining true to their core mission. Meanwhile, the public image of the company continued to rise. Customers were noticing the difference. Passengers who had flown with the airline for years spoke about the improved service, the professionalism of the staff, and the genuine care they now felt when they interacted with employees. The CEO was pleased, but she knew that sustaining these improvements meant continued focus and commitment. One evening, as she was leaving the office, the CEO received a message from Rachel. It was a thank you note from one of the employees who had been part of the early diversity and inclusion training sessions. The employee, a longtime staff member who had been skeptical at first, expressed how much the changes had impacted them personally and professionally. "I used to feel invisible in this company," the employee wrote, "but now I feel like my voice matters. I can see the difference in how we treat each other, and I'm proud to be a part of this team. Thank you for leading the way." The CEO smiled as she read the message. It was moments like these that made all the challenges worth it. It wasn't just about improving the company's bottom line or winning industry awards, it was about creating an environment where people felt valued, where they could thrive and contribute in meaningful ways. It was about building a legacy that went beyond profits. That night, the CEO felt a deep sense of fulfillment. There was still so much work to do, but for the first time in a long while, she felt confident in the direction they were heading. The company had come a long way, but it was clear that they were only just getting started. The future held endless possibilities, and she was ready to continue the journey. The road ahead was sure to be filled with challenges, but the CEO knew that with the commitment of her team, the company could achieve anything. This was a new chapter in the company's story, one that would set the stage for the next generation of leaders, innovators, and change-makers. As the new year began, the CEO found herself reflecting on how far the company had come. They had made incredible strides in improving the workplace culture, driving diversity and inclusion initiatives, and fostering a sense of belonging for every employee. It wasn't just about the numbers or the accolades. What mattered most was the change they had made in people's lives. Yet, there were still moments that tested the CEO's resolve. Despite all the progress, there were still employees who struggled to fully embrace the new company culture. Some felt overwhelmed by the continuous push for change, while others resisted the cultural shift entirely. The CEO knew that this was inevitable. Change, especially at the scale they were working on, was always met with some form of resistance, but she also knew that the work was too important to slow down. The phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Rachel. "Ma'am, I think you'll want to see this," Rachel's text read. Attached was an article that had just been published in a major business journal. The headline read, "Is corporate diversity just a trend? One airline's fight for real change." The CEO clicked on the link, her heart sinking slightly as she read through the article. It was an analysis of several companies' diversity efforts, with a focus on the airline. While the article acknowledged the positive steps the company had taken, it also raised questions about whether those efforts were truly sustainable in the long term. "It's one thing to implement diversity initiatives," the article stated, "but the real test comes when the spotlight dims. Will these companies maintain their commitment, or will the pressure of corporate competition lead them back to old ways?" The CEO knew that such questions were inevitable. Public opinion could be fickle, and the media loved a good headline, especially when it came to the complexities of corporate change. She was not naive. She understood the risks of becoming complacent, of letting the company's hard work fade into the background as the industry moved on to the next trend. This was not just a momentary shift for her, it was a long-term commitment. The CEO knew she had to respond to the article, but not in the way many would expect. Rather than retreating into defense, she wanted to lean into the conversation, to show that the company was not afraid to acknowledge the challenges and embrace the ongoing process of growth. She drafted a response to the publication, reaffirming the company's commitment to its diversity and inclusion efforts, but also acknowledging that real change was a constant journey. "We are aware that transformation is not instantaneous," she wrote. "It requires continuous effort, and we are committed to that effort. The work we've done so far is only the beginning, and we are fully aware that there is still much to be done. We will not be satisfied with surface-level progress. We will keep pushing, keep learning, and keep evolving to ensure that our commitment to diversity, inclusion, and respect is woven into every fiber of our company. We invite others in the industry to join us in this journey." The response was published the following day, and while it did not completely silence the critics, it was widely praised for its transparency and honesty. The CEO knew this was an important moment not for her personally but for the company. It was a reminder that the journey was not a straight line, and that the road ahead would require constant attention and resilience. As she prepared for a round of meetings with her leadership team, the CEO realized that this was the reality of transformative leadership. It wasn't about reaching a destination, it was about staying committed to the process, even when the road got rough. The leadership team gathered in the boardroom, and as they discussed the company's next steps, the CEO could sense a renewed sense of purpose. There was still work to be done to ensure that the company's diversity and inclusion efforts were integrated into every department, every function, and every team, but she was confident that they were on the right path. The conversation turned to employee feedback, and the CEO listened intently as each leader provided updates on their areas of responsibility. It was clear that there were still some employees who were struggling with the cultural shift, but there were also many who were embracing it with enthusiasm. The CEO knew that it was her job to continue fostering an environment where employees felt supported in their journey, regardless of where they were in the process. After the meeting, the CEO walked to her office, her mind buzzing with new ideas and strategies. There was no time to rest on their laurels. They had made great progress, but the work was far from done. The CEO had never been more certain of her commitment to creating an environment where every employee could thrive. It wasn't just about policies or initiatives, it was about shaping a company culture that was based on respect, authenticity, and accountability. And that was what she was determined to achieve, no matter how long it took. As she sat at her desk, she took a deep breath and smiled. The challenges, the criticisms, and the resistance would come, but she was ready for them. The future was filled with opportunities, and she was excited to continue the journey. As the CEO continued to lead her company through the transformation, she realized that the work they had done to promote diversity and inclusion was only the beginning. The road to creating a truly inclusive workplace was long and winding, and there were still many challenges ahead. But she also knew that the company was on the right path. With each passing day, the changes they had made were becoming more deeply ingrained in the company's culture. Employees were starting to see the benefits of a more inclusive workplace, and the company was becoming more competitive as a result. As she sat in her office one afternoon, reviewing the latest financial reports, the CEO received a call from Rachel. "Ma'am, we've just received an invitation to partner with a major industry group to help them with their own diversity and inclusion initiatives," Rachel said. "They've been following our progress, and they want to learn from our experience. This could be a huge opportunity for us to share our story and expand our influence." The CEO smiled at the news. It was a sign that the company's work was being noticed and that their efforts were starting to have an impact beyond their own organization. "That's fantastic," the CEO said. "Let's set up a meeting with them. It's important that we continue to lead by example, and this is an opportunity to do just that." As the meeting with the industry group approached, the CEO found herself reflecting on everything the company had achieved. She had always known that true leadership was about more than just making the right decisions, it was about inspiring others to take action and make a difference as well. The company's success in transforming its culture was proof that change was possible, and that other organizations could follow suit. The meeting with the industry group went exceptionally well. The group was impressed with the company's efforts, and they were eager to learn from the CEO's experience. The CEO shared the challenges they had faced, the strategies they had used to overcome resistance, and the impact the changes had had on both the company's bottom line and employee satisfaction. "The key," the CEO explained, "is to make diversity and inclusion an integral part of your company's DNA. It can't be a separate initiative, it has to be woven into everything you do. That means making sure your leadership team is committed to the cause, that you're providing the resources needed to implement the changes, and that you're willing to address challenges head-on when they arise." The industry group was eager to take the CEO's advice and begin implementing similar strategies within their own organization. They saw the value in the approach and were excited about the potential benefits. "We want to be as successful as your company," one of the group's leaders said. "We see how much of an impact diversity and inclusion has had on your company's success. We want that for ourselves." The CEO felt a deep sense of pride as she listened to their words. It wasn't just about the recognition, it was about knowing that their work was inspiring others to take action. The impact of their efforts was rippling out into the industry, and it was clear that they were leading a movement that would change the business landscape for years to come. Over the next few weeks, the CEO and her team worked closely with the industry group to help them develop their own diversity and inclusion initiatives. It was rewarding to see their guidance being put into action, and the CEO felt a sense of fulfillment knowing that they were helping to create a better future for so many people. Meanwhile, the company continued to thrive. Employee satisfaction remained high, and customer satisfaction was at its peak. The company's commitment to diversity and inclusion had not only transformed its internal culture, but had also made it a more attractive employer, a more respected leader in the industry, and a stronger competitor in the marketplace. The CEO knew, however, that it would be easy to become complacent. The road to true equality and inclusivity was long, and the company could never stop striving to improve. As she prepared for another round of meetings with her leadership team, she reminded herself of the importance of staying vigilant and committed to the company's mission. As the team discussed new initiatives and strategies, the CEO felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had built a team that was as committed to the company's vision as she was, and together, they were making a real difference. They were not just leaders of a company, they were part of something much larger. They were part of a movement that was changing the way business was done, and the CEO was proud to be at the helm. Later that evening, as she sat at her desk, the CEO received another message. It was from a former employee who had worked for the company when it was still struggling with its internal culture. The message was brief but powerful. "Thank you for making this change. I left the company a few years ago, but seeing what you've done makes me proud to have been a part of it. You've changed the company, but you've also changed lives." The CEO felt a lump in her throat as she read the message. It was moments like these that reminded her of why she had taken on the challenge in the first place. It wasn't about accolades or recognition, it was about making a real, lasting impact on people's lives. The future was still uncertain, and there were still many challenges ahead. But the CEO knew one thing for sure. The company was on the right track. The work was far from finished, but with each day, they were moving closer to their goal. And with the support of her team, the employees, and the communities they served, the CEO felt confident that they would continue to lead the way, not just in business, but in making the world a better, more inclusive place. As the CEO reflected on the transformation her company had undergone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the progress they had made. It had been a long and challenging journey, but they had stayed true to their mission of fostering a diverse and inclusive workplace where every employee felt valued. The cultural shift had not been easy, and there had been moments of resistance and doubt, but each step forward had been worth it. The company was now thriving in ways that surpassed even the CEO's own expectations. Employee satisfaction was higher than ever, and the positive impact on the company's performance was undeniable. But as with any transformation, the CEO knew that the real work was in ensuring that the changes were not only sustainable but also meaningful. It wasn't just about numbers or accolades, it was about creating an environment where people could truly thrive and contribute. It was about making sure that every employee felt empowered to bring their full selves to work, knowing that they would be respected and supported. The CEO stood at the helm of this company, but she knew that it was not her success alone. It was the success of the entire team, of every employee who had embraced the changes, every leader who had supported the mission, and every individual who had taken a stand for inclusion. The company had become a beacon of what was possible when people committed themselves to a shared vision of respect, fairness, and equality. Still, the CEO was not one to rest on her laurels. She knew that there would always be more work to be done. There would always be new challenges to face, new barriers to break down, and new ways to improve. But she was ready for it. She had learned the most important lesson of leadership, that true progress requires both vision and action, and that no matter how far you've come, there's always more to do. As the year came to a close, the CEO gathered with her leadership team one last time to reflect on their achievements. The mood was one of quiet satisfaction, but there was no sense of complacency. "We've made incredible strides," the CEO said, standing before her team. "But we can't forget that this journey is ongoing. We've proven that change is possible, but we can't stop here. We have to keep pushing, keep evolving, and keep setting the standard for what it means to be a truly inclusive company. This is not just about us, it's about setting an example for the entire industry and showing the world what is possible when we choose to lead with empathy, integrity, and respect." Her words were met with nods of agreement from the team. The CEO could feel the energy in the room. It was clear that the company was ready for whatever came next. They had faced challenges, but they had come out stronger on the other side. They had learned, grown, and changed in ways that would leave a lasting impact on the company, its employees, and the industry as a whole. As the meeting concluded and the team began to disperse, the CEO took a moment to reflect on all that they had accomplished. She looked out the window, watching the planes take off and land, each one a reminder of the journey they had undertaken. The work wasn't over, but she felt a deep sense of pride in how far they had come. The future was full of promise. The company was not just surviving, it was thriving, and it was leading the way for others to follow. The CEO had always believed that leadership was about more than just driving profits. It was about creating lasting change, about making a difference in the lives of people. And in that moment, she knew they were on the right path. She had led her company through one of the most transformative periods in its history, and though the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, the foundation they had built was strong. They were more than just a company, they were a force for positive change, a beacon of what could be accomplished when people came together with a shared vision. With that thought in mind, the CEO smiled, confident that the best was yet to come.